What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And today I'm going to talk about what happens if you're Chicano or Mexican or Central American and you come into the California Department of Corrections and you're not affiliated. You weren't affiliated on the streets and nothing else. What does that look like? And I'm talking about a time period before 2018 when they came up with the 50-50 yards, which is kind of a misnomer because when it comes to North and South, there is no 50-50 yard, right? You're either active or you're not. Um, and so, anyways, let's go. So, when I was in Solano, there was a guy that pulled up from Oakland, and he was labeled as a Northern Hispanic, right? When it comes to the Mexican and Chicano community in the California Department of Corrections, you're either a Northern Hispanic, a Southern Hispanic, or a Mexican national. Those are the three different classifications that you can fall under. Now, if you're black, you're black. If you're white, you're white. If you're an other, you're an other, regardless of your group affiliation. But that's not the same with brown folks. And so he came in, he was labeled as a Northern Hispanic because he's from Alameda County, which is up north. He's from Oakland, and he had a dope case. And and we were on lockdown at the time because of a North-South conflict. Marcelli had left in that conflict. And so here they bring him, right? And they bring him into the cell. And I let him know from jump, right? I said, look, we're at a time of conflict right now. We're on lockdown for getting off with the Southsiders. So just so you know, if there's any contact with them, it's on site, right? Until this gets figured out. And he goes, man, I really don't got nothing against those guys. And it kind of threw me off. And I'm a kid at the time, mind you. And so kind of threw me off. And he goes, I don't really trip off North and South, man. I'm not a Northerner. I'm not a Norteño. Like, I'm a drug dealer, homie. And if people got money, then I'm gonna sell them drugs, and that's about all there is to it. So I don't really sweat that stuff, you know. And I said, okay, well, here's the deal. This is a Northerner cell. This is a Norteño cell, and so you got some options. You can bang on the door and let the COs know that you're not comfortable staying here and you need to find another cell. You can stay here and kind of go with the program, and I'll give you the rundown, or we can get off on each other right now and see who keeps the cell, right? I said, just as a heads up though, if you bang on a door and you tell them to move you somewhere else, you're not going to find another cell on this yard that you can go to and just be who you want to be. That's not how it works, homie. And he's like, man, I ain't no punk or nothing. I'm not gonna bang on the door and lock it up. Cool, I never said you were a punk, but here's the options, right? And so he's like, well, he had like 8 years to do. So he's like, well, and nonetheless, he wound up staying there. I was a teacher already at the time, so I was kind of giving him the rundown and schooling him and trying to help him at an appropriate level for where he was at, right? I didn't want to scare him away. I wasn't trying to bully him, but also didn't want him walking around completely blind, right? That's not good. And so we go out to the yard and I introduce him, and I remember I was calling him Furby. He didn't have a nickname. And I was calling him Furby because for say he just kind of looked like a Furby to me. And so that wound up being his nickname, right? And he did fine on the yard. He did fine. And at some point he actually started getting kind of involved. Not a lot, but kind of, right? And I've reflected back on that since I've been home. And I'm like, man, that was foul, right? Because the reality is now that dude gets out of jail, and let's say he's at a bus stop and he gets into an argument with somebody for talking about his mom and he fires on him. Well, then now he's going to catch a gang enhancement, right? And the dude ain't really a gang member. And so I felt bad, but I didn't have another choice. There wasn't another option. It is true that there's nowhere else that dude could have gone on that yard or any yard in Solano or at that time, any prison besides an SNY prison, which they had started soon after. But even then, you got to lock it up. And so I felt bad because I was like, man, the system failed this dude. I didn't. I tried to help him. But the system did by not allowing him to just do his time as a civilian, as an individual. But that's the reality, right? That is the reality in prison. And so for Southerners, right, it's similar, but a little bit different. And so, and I'm not a Southsider, never been one. But in asking questions and kind of talking, I believe I got a pretty good handle on how it works. And obviously tap in the comments if you agree or disagree and you have some knowledge of this. But if you are from, let's say, LA or San Diego, Orange County, whatever, and you're Mexican or Chicano, right? And you catch a case, but you're never, you were never a gang member in the streets. You catch a case, you'd be a resident, right? They would use the word resident. And so you'd be like a Southerner resident. And you'd be expected to go along with the basics, right? Like be on the south side of the yard, the general protocols of just doing time as a convict, right? And if there was a large scale conflict, right? If the South and the whites were getting off, or the South and the blacks, or the South and anybody, right? The North, then you would be expected to participate because you're a part of the group to a degree. But now removals and politics and that sort of thing, your shoulder wouldn't be tapped for that kind of activity because you're a civilian, right? Not a civilian, a resident. You're a resident Southsider. And so now I suppose if you messed up, if you got out of pocket or did something else, then maybe as a form of discipline, you would be expected to go do something and probably saying no would not be an option. But on a just normal day, that's kind of how it would be. And so we didn't really have that. We don't really have that in terms of the North, this notion of a resident Northerner. Now there are yards. Solano was one of those yards where we had a large handful of people who in fact did identify as gang members in the streets, but didn't want anything to do with politics when they came to prison, and they were allowed to be that way. That's not the norm. That's not something I saw after that or that I heard about very often. Just early 90s, there was some relatively soft yards. A lot of those places wound up becoming SNY yards, not Solano, but other places. Anyway, so in that sense, for example, if somebody pulled up to Salinas and they were labeled on their bed card as a Northern Hispanic by the administration, then they fall up under us, period. And they're expected to do the same thing that everybody else on the yard is expected to do. And you don't get any passes, you don't get any accommodations, right? There's no sympathy for you. But you're also entitled to the privileges, so to speak, that come with being affiliated, right? There's a level of protection and security, and folks will look out for you and all that other stuff. So that's it for those two groups. Now, there are other options. There are other classification options. If you're of Mexican descent, you could run as a Mexican national. Sometimes they're called border brothers. Sometimes they're called paisas. I don't mean any of those terms derogatorily. It's just the reality of the language. You could run with them. However, in my experience, the way that the Mexican nationals work is, you have to have no ties to North and South, right? Because they don't want to be put into a North conflict or a South conflict, right? And so they may sympathize with one side or the other, depending on where they are as a group, but they don't want somebody that has dirty laundry with the North or dirty laundry with the South trying to hide among them. The other thing is, those dudes don't claim neighborhoods and cities in California or the United States, right? You ask one of them where they're from, they're going to tell you Michoacan, Juarez, right? Oaxaca, wherever they're from. And they speak Spanish. They're fluent in Spanish. They know where their family comes from in Mexico. And so that's what they would expect of anybody else, right? So if you don't speak the language and you don't know where your family comes from and you really have no connection to your cultural roots, you can't rock with them. At least that's what I've observed, right? You can't rock with them. And so then, you don't have any options. Now you're North or South. Now, if you're from Central America and you don't have any affiliations on the streets and you get your case, you could run as an other, right? By default, Central Americans are others in the prison classification. However, if you run with somebody, right? If there's a lot of Central Americans that identify as Northerners in the streets. There's a lot of Central Americans that identify as Southerners in the streets. So when they come to prison, they rock with the North or the South, right? Because that's who they are. But the opportunity is there. And I've actually advised people who ran with Northerners in the streets, youngsters, you know, teenagers that were being tried as adults and going to prison for murder at, you know, 16, 17. I've advised some of them, bro, run other, right? Run other, because it's a lot easier time. And that's not to say others don't get off. They do. That's not to say that others don't have their own politics. My very first day on the main line in prison, the others got off with each other. They had an internal conflict and they got down. I don't know what it was about. It was my first day. And so, you know, don't mistake them as some passive group, but they tend to stay out of the sort of conflicts and large scale conflicts that kick up with other groups, right? They kind of mind their own business and they police their own. And so I would encourage folks to go run that way, right? Unless they really trying to, you know, be about the business, then go ahead, have fun and see where that takes you. So that's, you know, it's a short video, but that's kind of the gist of it. And one of the most glaring things is how CDC historically divides Mexicans and Chicanos, right? And that's the only ethnic group that they do that to, right? In the terms of others, they take many groups that have nothing in common with each other and they lump them all together, right? Polynesians, various Asians, you know, natives, Central Americans, right? Folks from the islands, sometimes the Indies and whatnot. Anybody they put into that group, but they can't have a non-affiliated, you know, Mexican or Chicano card, right? For Blacks, if you're a Blood, if you're a Crip, if you're Kumi, if you're non-affiliated, no matter what you are, you know, if you're Muslim, whatever, your bed card still says that you're Black. Period. And then there might be a footnote. They run with this group. They run with that group. If you're a Nazi lowrider or Coco County Peckerwood or you know, a skinhead or just a Wood, kind of a non-affiliated Wood, or any of the other dozens of fractions that they have, then your bed card says that you're white. Period. And again, there might be a little footnote, right? But if you're from the North, your bed card says Northern Hispanic. It's not a footnote. It's a whole separate color. And same with Southerners, right? It's a whole separate color and it's not a footnote. And same with Mexican nationals. It's a whole separate color. It's not a footnote. And so that level of division on an administrative level for CDC is very strategic and it fuels this divide. Now, again, when you talk about, you know, S and Y yards of the past, right, that those started in the 90s, obviously that doesn't apply because they're basically PC yards, right? And so in PC yards, kind of everybody rock with everybody. And when they started in 2018, this whole idea of non-designated program facilities, also known as 50-50 yards or inactive yards, then those rules don't apply. I'm not sure, to be honest. I've never been on any yard like that. If they have a whole separate classification system or if just that classification system is not a defining factor, right? And if that's not something that's enforced either by those doing time there or by the administration. I think that's the way that it goes. I think it's kind of a free for all, but I'm not 100% sure. And so there's a difference there, but in the level 3s and the level 4s that are not, you know, inactive yards, then this still remains. And it forces people who break the law to link up with essentially a criminal organization when it comes to the North and South. It forces you to align with a criminal organization, whether you want to or not. And for those of us doing time, it's not, I don't think it's our fault, right? Because North and South has a responsibility to protect themselves, to secure their own groups, to secure their own resources, their own facilities in terms of the yard and the tables and areas and all this other stuff. And so a straggler, just an unidentified person, a civilian walking around is a threat to both groups. Because what happens if that person misbehaves? What happens if that person, you know, gets into a wreck with another group, right? Then who takes care of it? Who checks their paperwork? Who disciplines them, right? And if they're going to be disciplined by the group that is from the half of the state they come from, Well, then that's not fair to discipline them according to standards that they're not aware of because they don't fucking rock with the group. So it really is a catch-22, man. And so anyways, I hope that clears it up. I've been asked this question long before I had YouTube, and then I had some subscribers reach out and suggest that I do a video on it. So I figured, why not? Hopefully that's enlightening for you guys. At the end of the day, part of the message is, if you're out here engaged in criminal activity, even if you're not a gang member, but you're out here engaged in criminal activity, you're taking penitentiary chances, that in itself can leave you biting off a hell of a lot more than you can chew, right? And there's nobody really there to save you. There's nobody there to protect you. There's nobody there to stick up for your independence. But there are people there that are willing to welcome you into the fold, right? But now you're owned, right? Because once you adopt that label as a norteño in prison, or a northerner even, or a sureño, or a southsider in prison, you are now beholden to that group that created that title, right? And it's not about you anymore. It's about your role within that group, and you are absolutely expendable. So anyways, help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time, because you're worth it. And look around at the different content. I got all kinds of stuff, man. Not just stuff about prison and prison gangs and street gangs, but a variety of topics. And I would encourage you to look around, hit like, subscribe, all that jazz. Take care.